Now we're going to be doing the Pear Design, which is a beautiful finish, and it's a light color with a raised design. What it is it's actually two layers of our paste. You do one layer that we're going to be doing with our grid stencil, and then we're going to go back over the top of that with a two overlay stencil of a pear. And we've already prepped this board by priming it with a white primer. Since the end color is going to be a light color, so I primed with the white. And now I'm going to base coat with a light color. This is actually the same color as our paste. And we do this because if we happen to get our paste on too thin and we painted this a dark brown or something, then what happens is it may look like a bruise showing through. So you want to base coat the same color as the paste, or at least a light color. You could use white if you wanted to. I prefer to use a color the same color as the paste. Okay? All right, now we have our board. It's completely dry with our base coat on it. And then what we're going to do is the next step is our Fisher size, which is this right here. And we're going to put a nice, generous coat of this on top. And like I said, just spread this on in random. Make sure you don't let it puddle along the edges of the cabinet door or whatever piece you're working on. Make sure you smooth it out. Don't let the drips make little drip marks, because that'll actually show up in your paste later on, and you're not going to want to have to deal with that. So get it on generous, but smooth it out. Make sure there's no puddles in your corner, because the paste will follow whatever it's going over. Okay. Then we're going to allow this to dry. It takes about an hour or two, depending on the humidity. Okay, now we've allowed our Fisher to dry, and we've taped off the areas that we don't want to put this same design on. These areas here are where we're going to be putting our grid stencil on our paste. The easiest way to do this is to spread your paste nice and even. I always wet my tools, that way you don't get a drag when you go to smooth it over. You don't have to worry about it being too smooth. You just want to level it off a little bit at this step, at this point. And then what I like to do, again, everything needs to be wet when you're pressing it in, or it will lift your product straight off with it. So what I do here is I line my grid up with two corners, like this line that way and that line that way. Lay it down, and then gently, there's not a whole lot of pressure on this, just smooth over the top. Try to get any of the uneven areas smoothed off. And then you lift your stencil off, and you have your grid design. And then when I'm doing the edges on this piece, you don't have to get too crazy with it being perfect, but you don't want it to be obvious design going in a different direction. But I'll kind of pick up, where I left off here and try to make it a continuous pattern. And I'll spread like that, just press it in and lift it off to leave my grid design. Then after I get this all spread on, I'm going to allow this to dry. And then we're going to come back and do the edges, remove the tape, and do those. Okay, now we've got our grid stencil on. We've allowed it to dry, and as you can see, it's cracked for us. Now we're going to finish this inside. And one of the little tricks for working with routed out edges and this and that, it's a little hard to spread with the paste with a putty knife. So what we do is we take our product, take a little bit and we add a little bit of water to it and get it about the consistency of yogurt. And that is usually perfect for what we're going to be doing. Just want you to see the consistency and get all the lumps out. Get it nice and smooth. If you leave lumps in, then the lumps are going to come back and haunt you later. Think yogurt. Then you dip your brush in. I've got a few lumps here, but we're going to pretend I don't. And then you basically just spread it. See, we have the Fisher size already on here. And then what we're going to do is just paint this in these areas. You don't have a whole lot of time, and you can't go back and forth too many times, but you got a little more time than if you were doing this with paint. Make sure it's covered. And I don't tape off because this is so thin, it's really not going to matter. Taping off is just another step, wasting your precious time. There's another thing I do with this mixture. Sometimes if you force dry, the paste will get a little crack, and it may be a design that you don't want to crack in. So I'll mix this up, and I'll just brush it right over that crack and let that dry. And it will not, if you don't get it on too thick, it won't mess up your design. It'll just fill that crack in for you. It's a great little tidbit to know about, because now and then you're going to get a crack if you dry it too fast or too cold or something. Now you got to stop at some point or it's going to start moving on you, and you don't want that to happen because it starts setting up immediately. Okay, so we're going to allow that to dry, and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, we've got our first layer dried completely. We've sanded it down a little bit, smoothed off some of the bumps, got rid of some things we didn't want on there. And then we're going to lay this stencil down, kind of tape it in place. And if you want to push it down into your grooved areas, do that, because that's really interesting. Where else are you going to find that? And then you're just going to spread your paste right over it. Don't let it lift. Don't spray this with water, because that'll allow the paste to seep under your stencil. Now this is a two-layer stencil. So we're going to have to allow this first layer to dry a little bit, maybe about an hour or so before it sets up a little. And then we'll come back and do the second half of the stencil. Okay, so we're going to let this dry. Now we've got our first overlay is dry. Now this particular stencil is fairly easy to place. It's almost like a puzzle. You just kind of got to find where the leaves just fit right into the previous ones. But if you don't happen to be lucky enough to have a stencil that works that way, you may want to mark your corners of your first stencil with some tape. That's what I usually do. I usually just mark my corners, and then when I come back with this second layer,